Everyone, and welcome to the Equal Opportunity Committee's 15th meeting of 2013. Can I remind everyone to set any electronic devices to either flight mode or switch them off. Agenda item 1 today is a decision on taking business in private, and the committee is asked to agree whether to take item 2 on the agenda on draft budget scrutiny 2014-15 in private. Are we agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. I will now suspend the meeting to go into private session. two petitions. Petition PE1169 is on sexually graphic magazine covers, and paper 2 gives us an update on the situation with the petition. Recommendations are at point 5. We can close the petition on the basis the matter has been reviewed at UK government level and inform the petitioner and give copies of correspondence, or we can take any other course of action. What would committee like to do with the petition? I'm content to close the petition, given that it's been reviewed at UK government level. But I'm happy to take other views from the committee. Alex?
I'm inclined to agree with you, but the one issue is that the fact that it's been reviewed at government level does not necessarily mean that it will be addressed as we would wish it to be. The subject covered by the petition is one that often takes us into the area of censorship, and when that happens it gets a lot more complicated because there's a lot more to consider. I think this is a very simple and practical measure, and one that I would suspect is good practice already, and the fact that it's not happening is simply something that we should be pushing for. So while I would be content to see it closed on the basis that this is being reviewed nationally, I would wish to keep a watching brief in order to ensure that something could be done if progress isn't made in that direction.
Yeah, we could certainly keep a watching brief when it closes and keep a watching brief. Views from other committee members? Marco?
I similarly have a concern that while what we have now is an improvement, it's a set of voluntary guidelines, and that not only might not deliver the kind of change that we need to see, but it might also not satisfy the petitioner. Now, it may well be within the rights of the petitioner to submit a different petition based on the guidelines not being adhered to if the guidelines aren't adhered to, but that might be a difficult position to put a petitioner in, and perhaps isn't really the best way of addressing those concerns, which I think are still to an extent outstanding until such time as we see the guidelines taking effect. So I don't know if this could, instead of closing it, be referred back to the Public Petitions Committee or some action like that, because I feel that the issue isn't quite resolved. It's almost there. There's a noticeable improvement, but I wouldn't say it's entirely finished. And I have a great deal of sympathy for the aims of the petition.
We could refer it back, could we?
Yeah, you can refer it back if you want. You can sort of keep it and write back to the petitioner and say, you know, we're going to keep a watching brief, and could you write back to us in a year's time with you know, views on whether the position's changed.
Okay. Any other views from around the table? No. So do we wish to refer it back to the Petitions Committee?
Let them watch.
Let them watch?
They would presumably enter into correspondence with the petitioner again.
Yeah, would they?
Well, you can ask
Yeah,
them to,
we can ask them to do that.
Yeah.
And the petitioner could keep a kind of watching brief on it as well. Yeah?
Yeah.
Do we wish to agree to do that? Okay, right, excellent, thank you for that. And the next item is petition PE1372, is on access to justice in environmental matters, and again we have an updated paper in the form of a letter from Friends of the Earth, and again under point 5 we can either revisit the petition when further updates are received from Friends of the Earth, late 2013, early 2014, or we are open to take any other course of action that we see fit. I would be content, as we have a kind of ongoing correspondence with Friends of the Earth, to favour the first action point there. But I'm happy to take other people's views. John?
This is, it's been some time since this first came to the committee, as you know, and there are a number, I mean, there are undoubtedly considerable demands on finance for the justice system, including civil justice. I understand and share the Friends of the Earth's frustration about how things are going. There are a number of overlapping issues. I think it's very important that we keep this issue alive, not least because of the factors they highlight in their letter, so that would be my favourite option, please.
We'll revisit the petition when further updates are available, and we can keep our contact with Friends of the Earth. Oh, yes?
This came to equal opportunities. Although it's an issue of access to justice, it seems to be a broad access to justice rather than one interacting with any of the protected characteristics. I would have thought this would be a Justice Committee petition.
It doesn't relate to a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, but the Scotland Act gives the Equal Opportunities Committee a role in looking at discrimination on the basis of social background. So it comes under your remit under that criterion.
Because when we heard when the petition came, it is about it's a financial thing, really. People without access to finance are disadvantaged at going to court with things like this. So that was the reasoning behind it. So we're happy to do what's been suggested. Right, thank you very much. That concludes agenda item 3. I'm now going to suspend the meeting until 9:45. Thank you. Good morning everyone, and can I welcome our panel of witnesses this morning who have just joined us, and can I also welcome the observers in the gallery. Can I remind everyone, if you have a mobile phone, could you please ensure it is switched to flight mode or switch it off completely as it interferes with broadcasting equipment. Agenda item 4 this morning is an evidence session on women in work. And can I begin with some introductions? At the table we have our clacking and research team together with official reporters, and around the room we are supported by broadcasting services and the security office. My name is Mary Fee and I'm the committee's convener. I'm now going to ask members and witnesses to introduce themselves in turn, starting on my right. And it would be helpful if, when witnesses introduce themselves, they could briefly explain a little bit about their situation, as it may help the members in directing questions to you. So, Debbie.
Hello everybody, I'm Debbie Duncan. I was previously a volunteer for Fife Gingerbread, and I was involved in the Evidence, Participation and Change research project with Poverty Alliance, where we looked at surviving lone parenthood and the effects of poverty. I'm currently now employed as a teen parent project worker within Fife Gingerbread. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alison Johnston. I wrote to the Equal Opportunities Committee as an individual in February last year, really wanting to raise the issue of quality part-time work and the lack of quality part-time work available in the labour market. With my other hat on, I'm also employed by the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology, and we work to increase women's participation in those sectors where they're underrepresented.
Martin Va, good morning. John Finney, MSP Highlands and Islands.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Hogg. I am a mother who is returning to work, so I have been looking for a job for the last 2 years, and I'm finding it, quite challenging to come back into the private sector and finding the process from actually moving through to get an interview to get back into work. It's quite challenging just now, having had a break.
Alan Johnston, member from North East Scotland.
Lynn McLaren, I'm Director of Business Banking in Glasgow for the Royal Bank of Scotland. I look after 5,000 small medium enterprise businesses with 16 of a team.
Hi there, I'm Claire Faulkner. I'm a volunteer with Fife Gingerbread. I also took part with Debbie in the EPIC project on surviving lone parenthood and the effects of poverty. I'm here today mainly to gather more evidence on the barriers that's around for people facing employment, especially lone parents.
Morning, I'm Siobhan McMahon, MSP for Central Scotland.
Hi, I'm Tanri Parnates. I'm from Women Scotland. I will be speaking in relation to race equality agenda, also in relation to the barriers to women into employment.
John Mason, I'm the MSP for Glasgow Shettleston.
I'm Caroline Wallace. I work full-time in 2 part-time positions. I'm wearing lots of hats today. I'm the Science Policy Advisor at the Society of Biology, and in that role I produced the Tapping All Our Talents report for the Royal Society of Edinburgh on women in science. I also work at the University of Edinburgh supporting their scientific schools in achieving Athena Swan accreditation for good practice in progressing academic women in science.
I'm James Dornan, I'm the MSP for Glasgow Cathcart.
I'm Leslie Yellowlees. I also wear 2 hats today. I'm the President of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I'm the first woman to hold that position in its 171-year history. And I'm also Vice Principal and Head of the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Edinburgh, and have worked unceasingly since I took up that position to try and introduce and enforce people to look at things like the Athena Swan and all my schools to take that forward.
Good morning, my name is Carol Fox from Fox & Partners in Edinburgh. I'm a lawyer who has for the last 5 years dedicated my time to fighting mass equal pay cases against councils, throughout Scotland. I'm here this morning on behalf of the 12,500 women that we represent, but particularly on behalf of the 6 to 8 women who have died waiting on their equal pay cases being resolved. And I'm particularly here this morning to ask the MSPs from the west of Scotland to take less evidence and more action in relation to resolving these cases, because taxpayers' money is being used to defend the indefensible, and these cases have been running for 8 years.
I'm Mark Obiagi, I'm the MSP for Edinburgh Central, and I'm the Deputy Convener of the committee.
Hello, I'm Patricia Cleghorn. I'm Principal and Founder of Orchid International. We run personal development courses, very focused ones, helping businesses to create success. So we work globally and also small one-women bands, if you like. So we're very aware of various issues. Also work quite a bit in the public sector over social workers, lecturers, teachers, and the young people who are in their charge. And we have a particular stream now of Flourish courses for women, because we see that as so needed, that building, everything needs to be done now to help women flourish, because we see evidence that when women flourish, everybody flourishes. So that's what we're gearing for very much today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Committee members have a number of questions for the witnesses, and if someone would like to answer a question from one of the committee members, if you could just indicate, and we'll take a note of your name, and we will make sure that everyone is included in the discussion. And I'm going to start with John Finney, who has questions around skill shortage and demographics, and then move on to John Mason with questions around self-employment and part-time working. John.
Thank you, Convener. It's a question to Alison on my left here. It's a reference in the evidence you submitted, Ms Johnson, and it was about demographic changes and how that will prompt the need for greater flexibility, and also the issue of skills shortages. Yeah. Also, you touch on downgrading. Are you able to expand on that and maybe open up some areas of discussion for us, please?
Sure. So when I wrote to the Equal Opportunities Committee, I really wanted to raise the issue of the lack of quality part-time jobs and flexibility. I guess I see those two things as different things within employment. And a lot of the discussion, I think, rightly focuses around women and childcare. But I think moving forward, that will only be one part of the problem, or one part of the issue. Obviously, with an ageing population, the caring responsibilities that everybody faces, men and women, are going to be changing. So there'll be more people. I think one of the submissions, the written submissions, talked about sandwich care, so looking after children and young people, and also elder care. And so I think that change in demographics will increase the amount of caring that will occur, and the number of people that will be involved in that. I also mentioned in my submission about skills shortages, and obviously with my Scottish Resource Centre hat on, SEMTA have been looking at the demographics within their workforce, and a lot of their workforce are men in their 50s and 60s, and the pipeline of people coming through isn't there in order to facilitate the continual filling of the skills gap. And so both those things, I think, present challenges for employers in terms of how they structure the workplace. So do they continue to operate in a way that they do currently, which can be quite rigid, or do they look at all the talent that's out there and say, how can we adapt our approach to the workplace in order that we attract women, in order that we attract ethnic minorities, in order that we attract all the people that currently aren't fully embraced in the workplace. And I think that from my own personal perspective, and the reason I wrote about quality part-time work is, I think if we look at women returning specifically, maybe Jacqueline could expand on this, there's a wealth of talent out there that isn't being fully utilised, all because they don't properly fit into a tick box of they've got this right criteria, they can work 9 to 5, and they aren't ready as an employer would see it.
Could I just come in there?
quality part-time work is essential, and businesses are getting far better value from part-time skilled and managerial workers. So it's essential to the Scottish economy to have these, as well as to women, obviously. And you so rightly mentioned elder care. I noticed that wasn't on the agenda, but really needs to be. The proportion of women who, statistically and experientially are, the carers, not just for children, but for elder care and for those who are sick and needing help. So that's key as well. It doesn't seem to be structured into any plans. So, good.
Thank you for that, Convener. If I maybe follow on with a question to Dr. Caroline Wallace about the submission, if I may, please. And it was under the summary of events there. The heading was Lost Talent, and I'll just put this phrase on the record and appreciate your comment on it, please. And it's where you say, in regard to lost talent, although this represents a loss of opportunity to individuals, it also represents a major quantifiable loss to the economy and society. It is estimated that a doubling of women's high-level skill contribution to the economy would be worth as much as £170 million per annum to Scotland's national income. It's an economic loss that Scotland can ill afford. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that, please?
So when we were preparing this report, we commissioned Professor Ailton Mackay at the University of Glasgow to estimate how much lost talent and how much that cost to the Scottish economy. Now, that wasn't just science. This was people who are lost in all areas of the workforce. But in our struggling economy, 170 million, it might not seem a lot when we're used to talking in billions of pounds, but actually I think that that's incredibly significant. So that can be women who are not able to return to work because there's a lack of support there, or they are working part-time because that's the only way. I think employers tend to think of flexible working as automatically meaning part-time working, which it's not. I work full-time and flexibly. I'm very lucky in that. But I think women, because they come up against this problem of asking for flexible working, that they end up being forced into part-time positions. Of course, lots of women do want part-time positions. So that sort of loss there as well. And as Alison pointed out, the energy sector, so a couple of years ago Scottish Power said exactly as Alison did, that 80% of their staff are due to retire within the next 20 years. So there are women out there who can do the work. We've got a huge engineering department at Edinburgh University with quite a significant number of women. And these people are just being lost at every stage.
Is that a growing sum of money then?
Pardon?
Is that a growing sum of money that's being lost?
I don't know. I don't know the details of that.
Okay, thank you.
Alison, and then Leslie Young.
Just to add to that, in terms of one of the questions you asked was around downgrading, and I didn't answer that in the thing, and I just want to bring it up because often when women move from full-time work to part-time work, and because of the lack of availability of part-time jobs, there's actually there was research done by Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Women Like Us, and they found that in the job market, the advertised job market, only 3% of jobs that were advertised were part-time and with a salary of above 20k full-time equivalent. So that's a tiny proportion. So if you're a woman looking to go into part-time work, you have some kind of stark choices. So either you stay full-time in order to maintain your level of skills, or you opt for the flexibility and part-time status but downgrade your employment, so you're working below your level of qualification and experience. And there was a report written by the Government Equality, or commissioned by the Government Equalities Unit in London, and it suggested that if you move to a different employer when you move to part-time, that you downgrade somewhere between 35 and 41% of women will downgrade if they change employer. If women stay with their employer, so they're staying with their same employer, but they move to part-time, still 8 to 18% of those downgrade. So even if you're staying with your employer and you have a history of employment with them, women still are still forced to make a choice between part-time and the level of skill and qualifications that they operate at. And that in itself adds to that loss that Caroline was talking about. So, it's kind of a vicious circle. There's so many opportunities in this where women's talent is being lost in that move around work and flexibility and part-time work.
I've got Professor Eloise, Dr Wallace, and then Jacqueline, you wanted to come in as well now.
I didn't want to particularly concentrate on part-time work. I think for me one of the most interesting statistics from the report was that only 27% of women who take science-based degrees, STEM-based degrees, then stay within that subject and use their skill set. And I think to lose 73% of that skill set is something that we need as a country to address, because it's too many. And we have the skills shortage. And having recognised we have the skills shortage, and with the demographics as well, why are we not looking to see where we've got this huge body of people there with the skill sets we need? Why are we not looking to see how we can keep them using those skill sets for the benefit of us all in Scotland? Just to say that the equivalent percentage for men is that I think it's about 52% stay in the skill. So, they have it. There's a problem there as well. 48% of them leave. But I think it's just such a stark difference between the women who stay using the skill set and who leave.
Line and then Jacqueline.
I just wanted to come back to something Alison was talking about, and we were talking a little bit about the differences between flexible and part-time working. Now, wearing both my hats, both my employers, I meet a lot of women in science, and they talk about how because they feel that they're not able to work flexibly, that actually they'll take part-time positions but work full-time. They'll be there more than the hours that they're contracted to work because they feel guilty about working flexibly, and so that they can go and pick up their child from school, they will say that they work part-time when actually they work far more than that. And I think that that's incredibly common, and I'm sure it's not just limited to science.
Jacqueline and then Lynn.
I think I just want to add my voice to this as somebody who's actually trying to get back into work. I have a master's in multimedia technology. I have 16 years of experience working with software development, and I was made redundant from my previous position and decided to take a few years out. Then the stock market crash came and everything, so I've been trying for the last 2 years to get back into employment. What I don't want to do is to take a secretarial job, because I don't think that's good for me, and I don't think it's good for the Scottish economy. I paid for my master's. I want to use it. I like working with technology. I like being in that area. So my challenge is to find a position there, and it's very difficult to do that. I go through the recruitment process, and I can match all of the criteria, but I may not have the Prince 2 qualification or the Agile qualification, because those have been new methodologies and work techniques that have come out since I was in the workplace. However, I understand all of those principles and how to work to those, and I understand more than that. So if there's a graduate or somebody who's been through having done those qualifications, I will still know more than that person, but I can't specifically say on my CV, and I don't want to lie, that I have those qualifications. So you've got to be constructive in how you word that. And I have noticed that I'm getting picked up from a couple of jobs now that I can say that I can do those techniques without actually saying that, yes, I have them. So the question there is, how to get me from my CV going out to an employment agency to be picked up by an employer. And what they actually do in the employment, when you go through, is they will sift out CVs that potentially have breaks of maybe as less as 12 to 18 months. I have almost a 7-year break in any real work from my last professional employment. So that puts me at a disadvantage, so I might not get picked up that way. Then I'm looking at the job description itself could possibly say, looking for somebody who is currently doing this job. Now, that's not going to be me. So how do I move forward? How do I get myself onto the books of the employers? And the employers seem to tell everybody that, yes, they are willing to take back women who are returning to work. They want our skills, they want to do it. But the recruitment process means that we don't get through. Sometimes the agencies take our CVs and they'll say, there are some people coming back into employment. But then the employer will turn around and say, well, actually, on this occasion, we're looking for somebody who's actually doing the job already. So how do you stop that? How do you encourage employers, and I'm talking about the private sector primarily, How do you get them to see us returners as attractive people to come back and have in the workplace? Maybe it's something we should be looking along the lines of the incentive to employ young people coming through should actually be applied to women returners as well. That might make us more attractive to actually come through into the workplace. But I don't want to have to change my CV, which is what I'm potentially going to be looking at, because I'm coming up for my one formal year of claiming income support and job seekers allowance. And after a year, I'm not quite sure of the changes, but I think there will be changes, and I may be forced to look for other work. So I may be forced to start looking for a secretarial position, which means I have to downgrade everything on my CV. I'm not looking for part-time work. It doesn't exist in my industry, so I'm just not even looking for it. So I'm looking to go back full-time, and I want to work, but I've sent out a lot of CVs for a lot of jobs, and they just don't seem to get anywhere.
Lynn and then Siobhan, did you have a supplementary question? Lynn.
Original employer when I first started work. When I first asked to be, I had a very high profile position and I fell pregnant, and they automatically assumed that I would be downgraded. I couldn't continue doing what I was doing at that point in time. I'm very pleasantly pleased to say that it's actually changed significantly in the organisation I actually work for just now. The Royal Bank has a lot of flexible working. Right? I hear your point, Caroline, about women who are part-time and women who are flexible and they do extra hours, etc. And flexibility can actually be working from home. We have systems in place where we can actually allow our women and all of our employees to actually work from home, compressed hours. Right, but the skill set and the loss of that skill set for me is the biggest challenge we actually have, because women themselves think that they should automatically downgrade, and this is my own personal opinion, downgrade or go part-time because it's seen as the thing they should be doing. That's my opinion.
Siobhan and then Caroline, I'll bring you back in.
Convener, it was just on the point of losing women from STEM, although obviously Lynn has just now spoken about the downgrading of skills. But in the Tapping All Our Talents document on page 28, it talks about one of the biggest factors for many women deciding whether to remain or return to a STEM career is the provision of good quality childcare. And it speaks about existing facilities in some areas that are often oversubscribed at the time. So I was just wondering, do you know of the types of be it creches or whatever facility is used, and how they are used and how women engage, and men, in that process, and how do you think it can be replicated, not just in the STEM industry, but across our sector, if you look at what the government should be doing and should be looking at?
Yes. So the universities, and Edinburgh University is not alone in this, often provide on-site nursery facilities, and Leslie's fought hard to get one on the science campus for Edinburgh University. Often is the case, though, that these are incredibly expensive and people just can't afford to do it, and the hours are short, which means that actually you can't be too flexible in your working pattern because the nursery is open from maybe 8:30 till 5:30. So it automatically stops the option of doing compressed hours, like doing 4.5 days and 4 days or something like that, because you can't get the childcare outside of those hours. My own experience is my child only gets 2 of her allocated 5 places in the little village that we live in, Lauder, that there just aren't enough places for her, so she doesn't get that. So that adds an extra burden onto us. So there are university places, but my experience and from hearing from others is that they are very expensive. And I think that we need to make that more affordable. We need to have longer hours to allow people to be more flexible about how and when they work. That would be my point on that. And to come back to John and Lynn, Lynn, when you were talking about downgrading there, John, I know I couldn't answer you about whether this 170 million was a growing figure. I can tell you now that it's at least 170 million, and what I meant to say, and Lynn's reminded me, is that actually doesn't take into account people working at a lower level than their skill set. It takes account how many people are in the workplace and what hours they are working, but not actually that they're working at a lower level.
I'd just like to sort of tell you my story because it fits in very well with the evidence, and that previously, 5 years ago, I was an area manager for a building society. And then when after that, I was in business with my husband for a couple of years. Then the marriage ended and I became a lone parent. And things changed quite drastically. And that, at that time, my youngest was 1 year old. And I had planned ahead as to, you know, what could I do for future employment. And I've made the decision to retrain. And having gone from a very handsome salary, working full time, I have been studying childcare and early education, and so the salary, what we're talking about downgrading, I'm now looking at a salary on a full-time basis being half what I would have earned previously. However, I've had to make that consideration because as a lone parent, it just comes down to me for, you know, looking after house and children as well as trying to earn an income. The thing around childcare as well is that I have planned to have a job where hopefully, you know, I'm not having to pay for childcare during the summer holiday period. And also, I'm using a childminder at the moment, and in a rural situation, it's fairly tricky to get your childcare as well because, you know, there isn't a big selection, so you've got that extra travelling time involved as well. But also, because the before school club and after school club, it's not open to a 4-year-old. So I would have to have one child at the, you know, the school club and the other one at a childminder, which doesn't make sense either. So just now I'm paying more money to a childminder. So, you know, those are decisions that I've had to make as a lone parent, but downgrading to fit in with my family life.
I've got Tanvir and then Claire.
The same problem relates to the ethnic minority women as well, especially the childcare. A lot of the women don't go to work because they can't leave the children behind, or they can't depend on their extended families to look after them. It is very costly. A lot of the women are lone parents as well within the ethnic minority communities. We have, with BMS, have tried to encourage and empower women through various capacity building programs. And one of the problems we did come across was the childcare problem, and women, especially leaving children at 9 o'clock in the morning at school and then coming to the university or whatever training course we put on for them, and they always had this issue. They had to leave, you know, to get the child before 3 o'clock, etc. So I think a lot of the organisation need more resources for that, or to build in if they are doing any training programs. I think we have been lucky in a way that we have actually supported a lot of women in capacity building program into BA degree courses. One of the over concern is a lot of people who are coming out with degrees and their skills are not matched to their jobs. Most of the women are working in call centres. Women do want to, you know, something that matches their skills as well, but there isn't any opportunity. There is lack of opportunity in the job market for ethnic minority women, more so than, you know, in the Indigenous community. I think I would say I have been lucky in a way. I did come into employment quite late after bringing up my children. I had to work hard. I would say I worked harder than most people to get where I am today. But for ethnic minority women, I think there is multiple discrimination within the employment in the labour market. Not just to get accessing a job, but to stay in that job as well. There needs to be more sustainability, progression. We don't see very many ethnic minority women in boardrooms. We don't see very many ethnic minority women in managerial jobs, etc. And I think there needs to be something done about that. We need more the government to look into that or provide some more training. There are women who do want to work, who are in the communities. I mean, they often come up and say, we want to work, but there isn't any opportunities for us. But there are different levels of, obviously, jobs in the community. They are doing a lot of voluntary work within, you know, community groups, etc. A lot of women have gone into the care sector, helping other minority ethnic communities, just pay, you know, people with disabilities, etc. I would really like to see more women. When you look at down south, you see more women in managerial positions, and they have good jobs, they have a progression route, and they are promoted within their own organisations as well. But here in Scotland, I feel that a lot of I'm within an ethnic minority organisation. As I said, I am fortunate. I have been supported by my organisation, by my board, to where I am today. But a lot of the women in the sector, I think, lack that support and training. I think training is one of the biggest issues within the sector, that women can't get to where they want to be, and in the position, and also in boardrooms. Even some of the ethnic minority women do want to be on certain boards, but they can't because they think it's not for them. I think people... Even I can say, on a number of occasions, I have been on various boards. I am on various boards as well myself. But I can tell you that from my own personal experience, a lot of people don't still accept you. They see ethnic minority as as an alien. You're sitting there as a token. And I think that needs to be shifted. We need to shift that culture and start accepting people from the ethnic minorities.
Thanks for that. I've got Claire and then Patricia.
I'd just really like to pick up back from Debbie and Lynn, Lynn saying of the downgrading of skills. I've studied hard in accountancy and would love full-time work in finance, but due to barriers that are in place, that cannot be done. One of the main barriers, which a lot of people aren't even aware of, is that if you've had poor credit previously, my poor credit was over 8 years ago, I cannot then progress through finance because that is a barrier for me. It doesn't matter to what level I've studied, I cannot get past. As Jacqueline's doing, I'm having to revise my CV and downgrade what my skills are back to previous to my studying, and apply for jobs that are part-time, that are lousy, that aren't sustainable, just to make sure there's an income coming in. Picking up on Debbie with the childcare, again, I'm a lone parent as well. I will face the childcare barriers. In our area, there isn't much childcare available for kids that are young, before school and after school. Then you're going to a childminder. But what you don't take into consideration when you say, oh yeah, you can get a childminder, my kid needs support needs, and he also has dairy allergies, and trying to find a childminder that will cater to this is extremely difficult. There's 27 local childminders registered in my area. There's 4 of which would take my son due to his illnesses, and I cannot get him in due to places. Again, then I need the flexibility in employment, which is not available in the part-time hours that I need in lousy jobs. It's an ever-losing battle, and employers really need to realise that lone parents, male and female, women returning to work, we've got skills and everyone's got a past, but they have to realise that we are wanting through and we are willing to work, and we will do the full-time hours like every other person who's in their books. But it's breaking the barriers and getting through to them that's becoming the issue.
Patricia.
Well said to the last speaker. First, a very general point. I haven't attended a committee before, so I presume there will be time to ask of the MSPs what they are intending to do, and also perhaps some recommendations from those of us who have specific points. Some of them have been raised to make this have a practical outcome. Just summing up, it's clear that there's an enormous amount of time, money, talent being wasted in Scotland through not providing the conditions for women flourishing in the workplace. Mentioned childcare, it's all predicated now on women being the providers of care. And you can have legislation, which we need, and full provision of childcare, far better, that's totally obvious. But unless there's a change at another level where men buy into, want to look after children, care for children, do more of the domestic chores, step up to the line when needed, and before they're needed, that there needs to be that, and then the conditions need to encourage it. But you can talk till the cows come home. With the exception of lone parents, they do need all the support there. difficulties getting back into the workplace of very talented women. Now, we know from the Davis report where quotas in the FTSE 100 are going to be brought in if we don't reach, there's to be an improvement of 33% to get 25% of boards with women on. And surely we should be looking at doing that in some other areas. I mean, I prefer not to use quotas, but we are working against a backlog of the mores and manners of the past. So we need to take positive action there. I think with regard to women being rewarded commensurate with responsibility, we do need to look at that, and perhaps we need to look outside the business sector there. I think of one instance, you're getting it right for every child, where a huge, I wouldn't say burden because they are doing it, but huge responsibility is now put on nurses and midwives, and they're stymied by largely male, I have to say, senior members of the hierarchy, and even doctors who are sidestepping now providing the care that's needed. So there's a whole lot that needs to be looked at, and not just looked at, but acted on quickly before things slide even further. Interesting that the Save the Children report on surviving the first day, well-being of women and children, noted political participation as a key factor. We only come in at the index in the UK as 25. Female representation, women in Parliament are actually better in Scotland, but we need to see more use made of that power. It varies from party to party, the percentage, but a lot more I feel could be done on that.
Just before I bring in Alison, can I just come back to the point you made about asking questions of the MSPs and maybe just explain the process of today. This is one session in our ongoing inquiry into women in work. So we finish all our evidence sessions. We have gathered a considerable amount of evidence, and that is collated together and put into a report, and that's where our recommendations to government are in that report, and that's where people that have come along to give us evidence can see the recommendations that we have made and can also look at the other evidence that's been given from
evidence process been going on.
This is our fourth,
in terms of years or months or something.
This is our fifth evidence session in our Women in Work inquiry.
Period of time.
We started the evidence sessions last month, and we expect our report to be published before summer recess.
Oh, right. I understood that evidence had been given to this committee over a much longer period of time.
We've had a roundtable evidence session on the issue of women in work. We've also had a chamber debate on women in work, and all of that will feed into the committee report as well. But the actual women in work inquiry started at the beginning of last month, and we'll be finishing with our report before summer recess.
Would we hope to know what changes are going to be implemented?
The government, once we publish our report, the government has 2 months to respond to that report, so they'll come back with a view on the suggestions and guidance that we've given.
Women certainly need to know if they're going to be better or worse conditions if this whole separatist thing goes ahead. I mean, we need to know about that, because women are, always suffer when there's stress, and there's plenty of stress caused by the lack of information and uncertainty at the moment. So
that's certainly not something that would be covered in the government's response to our report. The government will respond to the recommendations that we make from the report, and that's not something this committee will be commenting on at all.
But we will then hear through the Parliament
yes,
what's going to be done and when.
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
I'm going to bring in Alison, and then I'm going to move on to further questions from the MSPs. Alison.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. Firstly, in terms of you mentioned, Patricia, about men's involvement with the family. And I think it should be said that the gender stereotypes that underpin the discussions that we're having today around part-time work or flexible working affect men as well as women. You know, while there's a link between part-time work and caring, and the perception that and the undervaluing of those two roles, it makes it quite difficult in the world of work for men to make a legitimate choice to work flexibly, and that impacts then their ability to engage with the family. So I think when we're talking about this, we have to acknowledge that the gender stereotypes affect everybody, not just women. I think, secondly, the other point I wanted to pick up on was going back to the caring, talking about caring, and just listening to some of the stories of people around the room. My niece has autism, and my sister and her partner are involved in a large amount of caring, and they live in Ayrshire, and my niece goes to a charity up in Stirling, an excellent charity called Spur Glan. But the commitment that is involved from not just them but the entire family around that is quite considerable, and that's one child. And I think without the flexibility of her employer and her partner's employer, that would make that situation hugely difficult for them, if not impossible for one of them or both of them to continue and work. And so I think when we talk about caring, yes, we're talking about childcare, but it's such a more complicated area in terms of elder care and care for children with disabilities, and all of that needs to be taken into consideration when we're considering the issues that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks for that. Before I move on to a question from John Mason, can I welcome Lindsay Calderwood and Cassandra Hughes, who have now joined us. It would be useful if perhaps Lindsay and then Cassandra could give us a little bit of background about your situation before we carry on. Lindsay.
Hi, I do apologise for being late. My background is I am a lone parent with 3 children, but I'm also now working for One Parent Family Scotland, trying to support other lone parents into work, so I can get a sort of personal background as well. My situation has been, when my marriage broke up, I have 1 child in school and 2 in private nursery. So it's been my struggle to keep maintaining that while working with 1 income coming in. And then obviously working with lone parents themselves and trying to support them into work and seeing the barriers they have. And it's mostly childcare related, but also they're getting into low paid jobs, temporary contracts, coming off of benefits to try and maintain an income coming in.
Okay, thanks for that, Lindsay. Cassandra.
I was doing administration before I became a lone parent. I've been a lone parent from the start, basically. When I had her, I stopped working for a while, but then when I put her to school, I decided for her to try and get back into work, and then I realised how hard it was for her to try and get back into work. So now I'm at the point where the jobs that's available isn't suitable for me for like childcare and stuff like that there. So I'm now retraining for to go and try and get myself another job for to try and go self-employed, because there isn't the work or hours or whatever available to me. So I'm going to try and go self-employed now. So that's about it, really.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to move now to John Mason, who has questions around self-employment and part-time work, and then Marco Biaggi has questions around occupational segregation and biosciences. John.
I mean, I think we've already been in the area that I'm going to ask about, so we'll build on what some people have said maybe already. I mean, I was interested particularly in Lynn McLachlan's comments, because if I understand it correctly, you've gone from employment to self-employment and back into employment. And one of your reasons for going into self-employment was because you felt there just was not enough flexibility in your current or your previous job place. And then you also talk about like jobs for the boy mentality, and female potential is still being limited by poor organisations and managers within them, and unfortunately by women themselves. I just wonder if you could maybe expand on some of that.
Expand for a long time on that, John. Where do I start? To go back to the very beginning, I was, as I said before, I actually had a very high job, right, within the Halifax Building Society, very similar to Debbie over there, right, and I fell pregnant and was downgraded. It was just automatic, right. There was no way I could actually continue to have that position at all. To my detriment at that time, I didn't fight it, right, and then I should have. Right, so we moved on from there, looked after my children, and went into two further parts of employment. Right, so two further parts of employment were actually South Lanarkshire Council, right, were one of them, right, and basically they were very flexible, right, with working. Right, so they actually allowed me to go part-time, they allowed me to do certain things I wanted to do. But when I asked specifically if I could have a career break so that I could go and train properly, right, to be a teacher in Jordan Hill College, they said no. Right, categoric no. So at that point in time, my personal circumstances changed, and my self-employment, right, came into being. I started a wedding stationery business with my best friend at that time because I couldn't get back into employment anywhere. That was Halifax, South Lanarkshire Council. I couldn't go because of my own personal circumstances to Jordan Hill, didn't have enough money, etc. So I thought, need to earn money. So the way I earned money was I started my own business. It's kind of gone full circle for me because when I did that, I then moved away to London and had to sell my business, which is what I did. And I came back and was offered a position with Royal Bank, like, on a fast track for 2 years. And when I went into that, I realised that it hadn't changed very much from when I had been in the Halifax. We've worked continuously for a long number of years, right, to actually drive this internally, right, to try and eliminate the childcare issues, the flexibility, the working from home. And I'm really pleased to say that it's actually getting loads better, right. For the last 5 years, we've actually seen huge improvements, right, within everything that we've all been talking about around the table. But the most interesting thing for me, because it's where I actually am working right now, is in business with business women. When I speak to the women, they actually still tell me they can't get into employment, so therefore they're going to start up their own businesses. Now, as much as I think that's fantastic for the economy, I think it's fantastic, right, that women want to be entrepreneurs. There's something missing with large employers. And the ladies around the table have actually just confirmed exactly what I think. How you get people back, right, with all of this skill back into large organisations is what I would like to see change.
I suppose my question following on from that, and Alison Johnson I think touched on this in her paper as well, is, you know, are we needing new rules? For example, all employers have to advertise all jobs as available part-time or flexible. And that was suggested to us at one of the previous evidence sessions, and obviously we've got limited power over the private sector, but we could do that potentially in the public sector and say that all jobs, I mean, is it that kind of rule that's required, or is it more the mentality and the attitude thing? And I think Alison Johnson also touched on very few jobs, professional jobs being advertised as being part-time. So any steer on that?
I would say it's both.
Both?
It's both for me. In the private sector, all of our roles in Royal Bank are actually, or you could say we are the public sector, all of our roles are actually advertised as flexible, job sharing, everything like that, but the mentality is still, right, so it's advertised, it's in black and white, so you would still think there will be some people, which is my point about managers, organisations, etc., right, who will do what they have to tick a box, and then choose the person who doesn't want flexible and doesn't want job sharing and will actually choose mainly men, if I'm being perfectly blunt.
Yes, I would agree. I think it is both. I think there is that step of saying, making a conscious decision to say, yes, we're going to have more flexible and we're going to have more part-time and we're going to advertise on that basis. But then there's a cultural change that needs to come along with that. And I think many employers still operate on a kind of ideal worker model of and who fits that ideal worker. And actually there needs to be discussion within the workplace of the range of workers that are available to them. And I think that managers, you know, I think more and more HR has been devolved to managers, and it becomes one small part of a complicated job that they do. And how are they trained to be aware of all these issues that we're talked about? You know, I think the role of manager in those recruitment decisions, in terms of the decisions to go part-time and award flexible working, is critical. Like they are often the decision makers, and I wonder whether they're truly supported and truly informed to make the best decisions.
Okay, Carol and then Jacqueline. Carol.
Thank you. Can I just pick up on the point that John made about do we need new rules or do we need to bring in rules for employers to advertise? Unfortunately, as the law stands, there is no right to part-time working. So there is no point imposing that on an employer when there's actually no law that says that they have to allow you to work part-time. So we have to look at employment law as it stands and look to review and reform employment law. If there is an issue that any woman applies for a job and isn't allowed on a part-time basis, there's a possible sex discrimination claim, but that falls back on the woman herself to prove her case, also falls back on her to take that claim within 3 months. And we're now facing in July a new regime of fees you have to pay up front if you want to take an employment tribunal claim. So it's getting ever more difficult for women to, first of all, they face the obstacle. If they actually identify what the obstacle is and get some legal advice on it and want to do something about it, then there are more and more obstacles being put in their way now to actually be able to get any access to justice and any redress. So we need to look in terms of the ability of this Parliament to influence employment legislation in Westminster to introduce not a right to ask for part-time working, but actually to respect the skills and experience of women, that they have in law a right to part-time working, and that the burden of proof should shift to the employer to prove why that is not possible. And at the moment, all the burden and all that responsibility rests on a woman's shoulders when she's also dealing with childcare, she's also dealing with economic difficulties. And if I could just add that as a single parent myself coming into the law, I had to take a legal case against the Law Society of Scotland. Some people advised me it wasn't the best move to take as I'm trying to become a solicitor. But having got myself through a law degree, there was a requirement to undertake a full-time diploma in legal practice where you had to become a full-time student. This was back in 2000. I contacted the Law Society and said, I cannot become a full-time student. I work part-time for the Equal Opportunities Commission, however. So what do you intend to do about this stupid rule that you have? And they said they intended to do nothing about it. So sometimes it's not about being dismayed by the obstacles that we find in front of us. Sometimes it's about kicking over the obstacles and seeking allies in our politicians who actually help us do that and give us the political will and actually hold those employers who do not uphold employment law, hold them accountable as to why they've got such poor practice. And I speak, just if you let me finish, I speak also as an employer, having set up my own legal practice in the last 3 years and employing 10 people, having taken that law of firm into employee ownership so that everyone has a stake in moving things forward. So it's about being creative and it's about not accepting the status quo. And I think if I could just, in relation to my own experience, just encourage every other woman around this table and every other single parent that I've heard, do not accept the word no you can't. Yes you can, and get some legal advice.
So could I just press Carol on that point?
Yeah, certainly.
Just on this point, I mean, other people have said it's both the law and the attitude. You seem to be saying it's just the law. I mean, are you saying that we should wait until Westminster legislates, or do you think we as a parliament and local authorities could start introducing best practice about part-time working as not as a legal right, but as a right in practice?
We've had lots and lots of positive practice, good practice. There's endless training. There's endless advice on equal opportunities. It's actually implementing it. And then if you fail to implement it, it's actually having the tools and the statutory underpinning to actually hold those employers accountable, which we don't have at present. So what you're looking at is really looking to persuade the goodwill of employers who perhaps are already on your side because they're actually talking to you about equal opportunities. But it's those other employers who have no interest. And I have one anecdotal story of another lawyer who was asked to come in to deal with a situation urgently. She couldn't understand why it was urgent. And essentially what had happened is an employer had been looking on a woman's Facebook page. And on the Facebook page, the kid in the picture had a little T-shirt on saying, I'm going to be a big brother. She hadn't yet told her employer she was pregnant. So they got a lawyer in very quickly to make her redundant before they officially knew she was pregnant. So when you're dealing with those things, and these things happen day and daily, then I think you have to be aware that you're not always dealing with people who are signed up to a progressive agenda. They may be nodding and saying the right things. You need to look and hold them accountable. And I don't know whether it's about how, and particularly why I'm here this morning, is why do public authorities Why are they allowed to be spending taxpayers' money? And I'm talking about Glasgow City Council, North Lanarkshire Council, South Lanarkshire Council, which are the only councils now in Scotland who are spending taxpayers' money trying to defend equal pay cases where there is no legal defence, and there will be no legal defence, but they will carry on appealing until someone holds them accountable to say this is not good enough in this day and age. And as local elected politicians and MSPs, I have to plead and ask people to really be asking the local authorities what they're doing in the name of taxpayers and what they're doing on behalf of low-paid women. 68 of our claimants have died waiting for the outcome of their equal pay cases. That is a disgrace, and it's something that I will not accept and not be silent about. But I am increasingly frustrated trying to get any MSPs, local elected politicians, or even the journalists. Most of the journalists that inhabit this building run the other way, and they see me because they know that I'm going to come after them going, what about equal pay? And one of the responses you get is, but Carol, equal pay, women don't get equal pay. We all know that. Where's the story? And I say, well, the story is that 68 of our claimants have died, and who is going to do anything about that?
Jacqueline, and then James, did you have a supplementary on this before I come back to John?
Both the points raised by both the last speakers.
I'd just like to say, in support of what's been said, that, you know, I am one of those women. I, you know, became pregnant, was returning to work for maternity leave, and was then informed that I had been made redundant. And I think that was, you know, set off by the fact I asked to work flexibly for a short period of time. So, of course, you know, that was my experience. So I don't have a job because my employer, when I asked for flexible working, then decided that I had been made redundant. And now I'm in the position of coming back, and I'm not sure if you understand the actual process in getting a job these days. The employer will write a job description that may or may not accurately describe what the job actually is. If you are successful and you manage to redo your CV to give them back all of the points that they're asking for on the CV, and if you're lucky you get through to the interview stage. My last interview was quite interesting because we couldn't quite work out why I was there for the job. So we think something maybe went wrong in HR. It was a lower position for me. The two people interviewing me were surprised that I was going along for this lower position. But I said, yes, I was interested in the job. It looked interesting. I could see that there was lots I could do there. But basically, you know, I haven't written any code in a number of years. There wasn't a lot of coding that needed to be done. And had the job description been written up more accurately, I could have answered those questions because I could have prepped for them. It wouldn't have taken long to actually sit down and look at some code, and I would have been able to handle the technical side for the interview purpose. And I didn't have any problems with actually going on and do that in the future. However, in the interview I was told that they felt that because I had actually, they were very complimentary, that I had actually, you know, worked at a higher level and had done things, my career had gone off and had been much more at a more senior level, that they felt that this lower salary I would become discouraged with after a while, and that I would be bored in the job and that I would then leave. So, I mean, for me, I was quite happy in the interview that I'd managed to turn it around. I had actually managed to get the answers. However, when the interview comes, when this email came back from HR, the reason for me not getting the job was that I didn't have the core technical skills that hadn't been outlined in the job description. So just because you put in for a job doesn't mean that you would get rejected on just that criteria. There's lots of other things happening behind the scenes there. And I was told by another employment agency that they hadn't written a full job description for the job. Otherwise, people would then have known who the employer was, because obviously the agencies want to keep everything for themselves, because that's how they make the revenue stream. So there's the actual process of getting through the interview is really, really tough. And actually to know the reasons why you've not got a position is very difficult. It's not transparent at all.
Okay, James, and then I'll come back to John, and then we have Tanvir. James.
Thank you, Convener. Just to say there, it's even more difficult then if you're getting caught between the two stools of being overqualified and being out of the business for a wee while when you're going for an interview. But I did want to speak about what Lynn was talking about RBS, and something that you raised about the employment law. clearly at this stage, you're saying RBS have started to work quite well in terms of flexible working and making life a bit easier for women employees.
Improvements.
Right.
Last 5 years, it's been a tremendous improvement.
Given that we don't have control of employment law and we can't go down that route, is there some research that shows that RBS benefit from this?
Not off the top of my head, I can't think of that, James.
Because what I was thinking was that if we don't have the law, what we have to do is we have to show good practice. Right, so if we have an opportunity here with a company such as RBS that are working in that flexible, mature way, if there was some way that they could get that message out to say that as a company we benefit from treating people fairly.
I could certainly go back and investigate that for you and come back to you if you want.
I'd appreciate that. Maybe if you come back to the convener with it, that'd be great. Just on the local authority point, I hadn't realised that Glasgow City Council were still fighting these. I used to be leader of the opposition there, and we were trying to fight that at that point, so I'd be happy to take that on if you give me some information.
Actually, and there are 2 hearings in the tribunal at the moment in Glasgow. When I leave here, I'll be getting the train to Glasgow. North Lanarkshire Council and Glasgow City Council and South Lanarkshire, I say. And it's surprising because all of the mass litigation against councils in England has now resolved. They have been settled. Most of the cases, fortunately, in the east of Scotland and Edinburgh City Council have settled. And it seems to me it's hugely perplexing for me personally that there are 3 large Labour local authorities who may have every equal opportunities policy under the sun on their website, but they're spending vast amounts of money unnecessarily to defend these claims. And one manager who came in to give evidence yesterday, and this is on the transcript, and I'm sure that the committee can be provided with this transcript, he had undertaken an assessment of various caring roles, and one of them was a night, social care nights, and it was in an old folks' home. And when questioned about his assessment of the work that women, primarily in that old folks' home, do to look after those old people, his answer to the tribunal yesterday, which just leaves me aghast, but his answer to the tribunal yesterday was that, well, it's a fairly straightforward job because when the old people come into the home, they only really last 18 months and they only really come in to die. So it's a really quite straightforward job about looking after those old people. Now, there was an audible intake of breath when he said it, and it's on the transcript. Similarly, in February, we had another manager who had assessed some of the female roles of the home carers, who are the backbone of our public services, the absolute backbone of our public services, and many of our claimants do 2 or 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet. But these home carers in particular were being assessed in terms of working conditions. And of course they have to deal with elderly incontinent clients and patients day and daily. So one of the questions was around how the assessment, and they get an assessment of value, that value then becomes a grade, that grade then becomes money. So how had they got this assessment in relation to working conditions? They had been scored at a level 2. It was then put to this witness that how does that sit when a gardener who occasionally picks up dog excrement was scored at a level 5? How is it possible that a home carer only scored a level 2 when it's quite clear? And the response to that was, these women know that that's part and parcel of the job. So it is as much about attitudes, and it is about our existing, the people in our big employers and local authorities and private employers who have these attitudes and who are not being challenged on it and who are not thinking correctly in terms of the law and applying the law. So we are confident these things are now at the tribunal. They will be judged and decisions will be made in fullness of time. What we suspect is that the council will appeal, because we have appeals going to the Court of Session, we have appeals going to the Supreme Court. South Lanarkshire Council, that was mentioned earlier, is taking a case to the Supreme Court in London in July because they have refused an FOI request for very basic pay information. My question is, how can this be? How can this happen, that vast amounts of public funds are wasted in this way, particularly in a recession? And also for people who don't have any knowledge of these equal pay cases, we're not talking about small sums of money. On the same grade, mainly our client base, our claimants are carers, cleaners and catering assistants, and they compare themselves to street sweepers, bin men, grave diggers. And they're on the same grade and therefore should take home the same rate of pay. And in fact, to find that all the men are paid 50% or 60% more, and they get that pay for turning up They don't need to do anything. Sometimes they get it for not turning up. Sometimes they get it when they're on the sick. So there is a huge problem. Everyone has known in Scotland for years that there's a huge problem. I can't understand why nobody is paying attention. I addressed at the International Women's Day debate that we had as part of this inquiry, and I was calling upon, please will some of our elected politicians associate themselves with this struggle. Please will somebody pay attention. I then asked Nicola Sturgeon for a meeting. Unfortunately, that with other complex things and diaries, that hasn't happened. I've tried to have meetings with Labour MSPs. I have to congratulate that Margaret Mitchell MSP in South Lanarkshire issued a press release saying it was a disgrace how much money was being spent on these things. And it's a strange world when I find myself that the only supporter I have is a Conservative MSP. But I will take allies wherever they come from, in whatever direction, because my focus, and I have to tell you, it has been the most important work in my professional career these last 5 years, and it demands great determination and great stamina, because it's hugely difficult to get basic information out of these employers, and it's about the political will to solve these issues. And the political will is going to have to come from the top, I think, because even though our women go and they canvass their local councillors, they canvass their MSPs, everybody seems to be turning the other direction or not joining together. I have individual MSPs who are saying individual things, but there's no collective will to say enough is enough, get this sorted. We have in black and white a COSLA document dated 1997 where all the employers in Scotland knew there was a huge problem, and in black and white had an undertaking from the unions that they would not raise any equal pay claims for the women because they would try and sort it out. Those collective discussions did not work, and cases started being raised in 2005, and here we are in 2013, and they're still going through the tribunal system. And unfortunately, may go further, may go to London, may go to Europe. In the meanwhile, how many more women, and it is predominantly women, how many more of our claimants have to die until there's a political will in Scotland to address this situation?
Thanks for that, Carol. I'm going to bring in Tanvi and then come back to John, and then I'm keen to move on to Marco with further questions. Tanvi.
I agree with Jacqueline there about the job descriptions. I think it's all about power relations when you apply for jobs, etc. Various women come to me from the ethnic minorities who have applied. Put in hundreds of applications to various jobs and never really got even through to the shortlisting. As soon as either they see their name or their ethnicity, they just turn down. The other thing I always face is either you're overqualified, you're a threat to men or the organisation, and they turn you down. I think it is up to the government here. We need to have some sort of good practices of positive action, and also to build in with the funding streams that organisations have to look into flexible working hours for women, and also to employ women, encourage women into progression, into skill, learning new skills, etc., so that they can progress and sustain their jobs. We find it very, very difficult with a lot of the organisation. Actually, only a couple of days ago, I had a girl in complaining about she went from community jobs fund to one of the organisations and got just 4 months into the job, and she was really treated very badly. I'm talking about an ethnic minority organisation here. Similarly, there are other organisations as well, where she was supposed to be gaining a lot of experience, and they should be enabling her with new skills, etc. She was doing cleaning jobs, cleaning tables, making tea, etc., and she was in tears. I would urge, I think, the Parliament here to build something within their funding streams to either to set up some sort of regulatory body, not just for the ethnic minorities. I'm thinking for everybody who can actually monitor that these things, especially with the job descriptions or flexible working for women, is taken into consideration.
Okay, thanks for that. John, do you have any further questions?
Yes, I've got one more question. If I could just comment briefly on Carol Fox's statement. I think all the MSPs I think here would be happy to sign up and say we have to sort out this equal pay problem. I also think we have to be clear, though, that we cannot give instructions to local government, be it Alex Salmond or yourself, convener, or myself, or any of us. We can encourage, we can criticise, but we cannot give instructions. But my question to really was touching on what we've already said about self-employment. Now, there was a kind of suggestion, I think, that some people go into self-employment because they could not get a flexible enough job. But I was looking at Patricia Cleghorn's paper, which was very positive about self-employment, if I'm reading it correctly, and said we also need to consider self-employed and entrepreneurial women, and also said many women business owners and those who aspire to set up their own businesses are raring to go. Let's give them the funding to do so. So it was just briefly, perhaps, what should we be doing to help women into self-employment?
Making access to funds easier. That really needs to happen. It can partly be via the banks. However, public perception of the banks is not too hot at the moment, so there can be an unwillingness to go down that road. However, there's all sorts of ways of doing this. Certainly banks need to be lending more to women, and possibly in differing amounts, without dallying around. Things like businesses tendering for procurement. That is an abominable process. It involves really, if you want to procure, for example, training or anything at all, if you want to procure that with a public sector employer, it's totally amazing. You've got to even attend a training course before you can fill in the form. And what it's doing is creating jobs in the public sector. It's not creating jobs in the business economy. We see that happening time and time again. So that's one area, but certainly accessibility from the banks would help. One exception is flexible training opportunities. I'm a fan of flexible training opportunities. It means if there's a training course costing, for example, £1,000, if the business puts in, pays £1,000, this fund will pay back 500. So it encourages that entrepreneurial thing. You put something in, you get something back for the training that you are undertaking. So that moves things forward. So yes, that is positive. I mean, you say I'm positive. I am actually very positive about Scotland because it's such a small country. Surely we can get a grip on all these issues that have been discussed. And we're such a small country that, we should be a beacon of light to the world, not scuffling around with problems with councils. So yes, all of that. Does that answer?
Lynn, because I think you wanted to comment specifically on the point about
Specifically,
RBS.
It's not RBS's fault. Thanks, John. We do actually offer a huge amount of support as RBS as an organisation across the diversity agenda, which has been working really well for the last 5 years. But also at this moment in time in Glasgow, we actually have a Women Enterprise Conference where RBS are actually commenting to 300 women and actually focused on access to funding. We do appreciate, we've done a few studies, and we do appreciate the key things for actually for people going into business, which obviously is going to help me because that's actually what I do as my day job. But also women's confidence, right? We need to help them, we need to mentor them, we need to... Yeah, absolutely. And I read your paper and I absolutely understand where you're coming from. But I think there's this misperception, right, that we are not lending money. We absolutely are.
I've had reports back to that effect. However, if you are, that's fantastic. More power there. But we do need to build the self-belief to offset the backlog of practice.
I'm sorry, I need to move on now. Sorry, Patricia. Can I bring in Marco Biaggi with questions around occupational segregation?
Yes, occupational segregation was the topic of our first two sessions here. I suppose a lot of this has been covered already, but to what extent is a big part of the problem that some elements in society see some things as men's work and some things as women's work? And as we've already heard from RBS, are there examples that you've encountered where there have been attempts to change that have started to bear fruit?
Carol?
Just very quickly, the whole issue of occupational segregation drives me mad because it takes the focus away from what's actually happening now. And in our cases, some of the issues when you address equal opportunities in terms of valuing the jobs that women do now, the response is, well, we have mentoring or we have a work shadowing programme, so we can give a woman an orange jacket and she can go off and be a bin man for a week. That's not really solving the immediate problem of valuing the actual work that's done in caring at the moment. And I think that occupational segregation obviously is a huge issue. It needs to be tackled, and in the longer term will be tackled as barriers are broken down by all the work that we've heard about this morning in terms of encouraging people to get into lots of different sectors. Until we actually value the roles that traditionally women have undertaken and ensure they're paid correctly and valued by society, that would be one way of ensuring that then there's a mixed gender wants to take up those roles because they're actually paid properly. My worry is that the focus is always on attempting to get women away from or out of the roles that they presently occupy. It's about choice, and a lot of women choose to do the roles they do, and we should value those roles. We've talked about the need for childcare, we've talked about elder care, we've talked about all these things, and my absolute focus is on stressing the need to value the roles that we have while opening up access and cutting down the barriers in terms of gender stereotyping. But that gender segregation shifts the focus completely away from what's happening in the here and now. That and the average pay gap. The average pay gap, again, gives you a generality, but it does, because in law, an actual woman needs an actual male comparator, and she needs to focus on the actual difference between their actual pay. So there is no such thing as an average pay gap that's going to help any woman take an equal pay case. So I agree that in the longer term, we have to do everything we can to break down gender segregation, but we must do that in a way which doesn't take our focus away from valuing the roles that women primarily do in the here and now.
Just bring in, I've got Alison, Lynn, and then I'll maybe come back to you, Marco. Alison.
Yeah, I obviously completely support what Carol was saying. I think I work at the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science, Engineering and Technology, and so I guess our focus is around increasing women's participation in science, engineering and technology, and I certainly wouldn't want to say, to take away from our belief is also about the valuing of roles that women currently do. But there are a lack of women within those sectors that are heavily gender segregated, and we work in different ways to try and address that. I think there is a perception about what is women's work and what is men's work, and I think actually women choosing to go into science, engineering and technology have to make very clear decisions in order to go down that route. I read another thing, I read an article yesterday that talked about women swimming upstream if you choose a career in some of these sectors, because you have to prove yourself time and time again, which is a real shame, because there's a real value to jobs in those sectors in terms of the richness of experience that you can get, that sometimes women can be put off with because of their experiences along the way. I think that lots needs to be done, and we work to support women to try and help them to remain once they've made that choice, because it's not just about getting women into those sectors, it's also about retaining them once they're there, for all the reasons that we've heard round this table today. And I think that you can do that, but also employers need to be on board and need to be making conscious decisions that they want to do that, and they want to create cultures within their workplaces that support women to remain.
I've got three people that want to speak, and then I'll come back to you, Marco, if that's okay. I've got Lynn, Caroline, and then Lindsay.
For me, I'm just talking from RBS, and you asked, was there improvement, a massive improvement? It's very much equal opportunities. However, what I will say is within the organisation there are different divisions. The division I work in happens to be corporate banking. Retail division, which all of you might be aware of, is all the branches. Right, the majority of the staff, right, are female. Right, because it's seen that females should go and serve on a counter, etc. But going into business, like that's men's job. Right, and that's hard stuff. I'm very pleased to say in business banking, where I work just now, the sort of impetus we have at the moment to encourage women, right, to get involved, because when I look at the 5,000 SMEs that I look after and my team look after, right, we have a diversity within that we have to replicate as an employer. So therefore, within my team, I have a very diverse team. I also have a Women in Business ambassador, right, who actually looks after the women customers of ours, right, and that's replicated throughout the whole of the UK, right, and we have one in every single area in the whole of the UK. So yes, there are still perceptions, but I actually sometimes think it's us, it's women that have their own limiting, and they limit their potential all the time. And that, I think, is where we as women, very, very successful women around the table, can actually do something about it. The men as well, with supportive managers and a supportive culture within an organisation, you can absolutely change. Right, and I totally agree with what Carol said.
Caroline.
I wanted to put my science hat very firmly on to speak here. So in science, yes, there is segregation in terms of the disciplines that women go into more generally. Leslie and I are fortunate, being from biology and chemistry, that actually at undergraduate level and postgraduate level there are quite a number of girls in these areas. Physics and engineering far less so. So in my Society of Biology role, and also work with the chemists in the Institute of Physics, we do go out into schools and do encourage girls to come forward and see these disciplines as being for them. But actually I quite often feel a little embarrassed and a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that I'm encouraging young women to go into areas of research where actually they will be clustered at the bottom of these, and actually for the majority of them they won't progress to the highest positions, and that does make me feel quite guilty at times. So we were actually very lucky when we were doing the Tapping All Our Talents report. It was great to see some leadership from Dame Sally Davis, the Chief Medical Officer down south, saying that if you wanted to apply for a particular stream of funding at medical schools, they would have to have this Athena Swan Silver accreditation, which demonstrates good practice very much at the silver level. And the Scottish Funding Council has gone around as well, saying to the universities, we expect this to happen. So Leslie really embraced this and was my employer at the University of Edinburgh, and made a diktat from on high that all the scientific schools would go forward. And I'm pleased to say that by the end of the year, all the scientific schools at the University of Edinburgh will have submitted for Athena Swan, and I'm pretty sure we'll have got it at one level or another. So I think good things are happening, but it does take powerful people like Dame Sally Davis. The threat of money being removed, there needs to be a carrot, but there also needs to be a very big stick. And when we were writing this report, we were very conscious that we took universities and academia to task quite a lot, but that was actually because they were the ones that we could get the data for. So there are lots of small, medium businesses in Scotland that we cannot get data for, so we have no idea how women are progressing in their companies. And I was listening to what Patricia was saying about the procurement process and how difficult it is, and I sympathise with that, but I want it to be harder. I want to make damn sure that when government is buying things, and it does buy things from the life sciences industry, my own, particularly the health service does, that make sure that that's your route in to making sure that businesses progress the women, don't just have them at the lower levels, but actually are progressing them to the senior levels. And I think that is the hook.
Just that Professor Yellow-Lees has to leave shortly, so before I bring in Lindsay, can I bring in Leslie?
Very kind, thank you.
Come in.
Yes,
this
certainly.
is something I wanted to just ask that you might be in good position to address on this, because we've had a few examples of already of industries or professions where women have come in and then there's been a gradual change over the years, and then we've had one example given to us, which is secondary teaching, where women have generally been the majority at the classroom level, but have not actually knocked on to becoming head teachers. In the evidence, there was a sense in bioscience, at least, that women were coming in and there was a slight movement, but how genuine, how substantive do you think that change is at the upper levels as well?
I note you've got some of the graphs there which don't make pretty reading, so that if you look from what's called the leaky pipeline from school right through to senior level in all science, and by science I mean science, engineering, maths, technology, I'm just using science, that they all decline. They all have a steep decline, and that's a real concern. And I think it's about culture, as you rightly said. I think law is one thing, but I think what each and every one of us can do is to help change the culture. And I know it's slow, and it's depressingly slow, And I always said that I never wanted my daughter to have to experience exactly the same numbers that I had to experience. And I'm sorry to say, I think probably there won't be that big a shift. But I do think more people are buying into this culture change. I was delighted to hear about RBS. I think the universities are also that way inclined. I mean, I think we have to be, because I think we just need to have everybody's potential there, and we need to use everybody's skill sets. And I think what we have to do is, when we get into positions to influence the culture and make that change, is not shy away from that. I think we have to step up to the plate, and I think we have to recognise that there's a job to do and not hide away from it and not shy away from it. And it's difficult, of course it's difficult, but I want to pay back. I want to make it better. And therefore, I will continue to speak out, and I will continue to do things wherever I can to make it better. And, you know, when I can say to all my schools, look, go for Athena Swan, because if you go and buy into that culture, if you go and buy into what that's standing for, it will make you do things differently. And so there are things we have to do. And finally, I would just like to say, I think there's just jobs. There's no girls' jobs and there's no boys' jobs. But sometimes I think we've talked about school children and getting that message across to them and getting them involved and getting them to see it. But we also have to pay very big attention to the parents, because unfortunately, they sometimes think there are girls' jobs and boys' jobs, and they have a huge impact on their children. And I think we've got a huge sales job to do for them as well. I thank you. I'm sorry I have to leave to get a train, but I just want to very strongly say it's culture. I think we have to change the culture, and we have to work to do that. And if we can do it more quickly, then count me in. Thank you for that. Sorry, I have to leave.
Lindsay.
I just wanted to comment and talking about the sort of predominant female roles. I'm working with lone parents, mostly female, some males, and it's work placements with a very huge national retailer. They do a 2-week work placement, and then we try and get them jobs in it. But even for these lone parents, they struggle now to get into retail jobs because of the hours that are being looked for to do. It's fully flexible, they ask for it, and obviously for a lot of lone parents that's impossible because the childcare hours don't suit. And also it's temporary contracts, and they are then told if they take one day off, their contract will not get renewed. So they've got that struggle, and that is a predominantly female role. And even care is the same. You know, they struggle to do the hours because of childcare. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Marco.
In terms of your experience there, what's the gender division once you go up? You know, the managers that are making these decisions about being fully flexible, are those predominantly male?
Yes.
Yeah. And would you
I
think
have
that would be
female
part of the problem?
managers will say to me when we're doing the placements that when they were started off at the bottom and they had young children, they wouldn't have been able to take the job the way it is now, because they are looking for people to be working from 6 in the morning. Weekends, they've got to work weekends to take a temporary job. They don't have childcare at weekends if you've not got family. So it's a struggle now to even get into low-paid retail work.
Do you have any further questions, Marco? Just before we close the meeting, because we need to finish shortly, can I ask one specific question from the Tapping All Our Talents evidence that we have? And it's on page 30, when you talk about recommendations to the Scottish Government, a national strategy for Scotland. Could I ask if you could give us a bit more detail on what you think that strategy should look like? And how it should be monitored?
Okay, well, we did outline a very basic strategy. I think government needs to show leadership in the way that Dame Sally Davis, as I drew attention to her, somebody in a very powerful position, threatened to take money away is always is the hook there. But we are grateful for the new legislation that we did mention in the report, making parenting much more equal in terms of fathers' rights and taking time off. But we'd like to see much more use of equal pay audits. And if you could try and get into business and industry, I know that that's very hard to do, but perhaps a carrot is the only thing that you can do rather than a stick. also encouraging universities and saying that you expect to see equality in women at senior levels. And much in the same way as the Lord Davis report did down south, and saying this is what we expect of our large companies, and we expect to see women on board. And that's the kind of thing that we were driving at there. And there's quite a few targets in the report that we expect government to take forward, and we hope that you will.
Can I have a supplementary from Siobhan?
It was just on a different point, convener, if that's okay. It was, again, Lynn, sorry for directing questions to you, but it's similar to James's point about monitoring and how you evaluate programmes. And I know a bit about the Focus Women Network that you mentioned. I know some women who are in it, in RBS, and how that works for them. But I was just wondering how that is evaluated throughout the business, because you mentioned in your own submission that you've had good managers and not so good, you know, to try and get that. Now, if you're part of a network and being mentored in that, that's good. But if you don't have an employer or who you go to for advice and various other things signed up to the network, or the practicalities of it, clearly there's a barrier there. So I was just wondering again how that is evaluated.
It's evaluated very much on the individual. So if you've got a barrier, right, there's a network. The Focus Women's Network is internal, right? So it's for career progression, to stop the glass ceiling, right? And it's actually monitored via the women who run the Focus Network, right? So if we have a challenge, like for example, if we're trying to encourage as many people as we possibly can, female, to apply for roles. And if I can put it very simply, right, women tend to always have to have a track record, right? Whereas men are viewed as are having potential. Right, so it's a slightly different concept. Women will look at competencies in a role. This is an RBS in a role, and lots of women I've spoken to actually look at it and think there's 5 things that I need to be really good at, right? And I only have 3, so I'm not going to go for the job. If you then look at the other version, which is the male, the guys who look at it and think I've got 3 and I can learn the other 2. Right, so we have that challenge within, and that's very common and comes out in most conversations we have within the Focus Network, Focus Women's Network. What we do have is a programme in place with Chris Sullivan, who is our CEO, right, of Corporate Banking Division, where he has actually got a programme in place where we are actively encouraging, and I don't like quotas, but sometimes, as I put in my submission, it might actually have to be a necessary evil, right, to actually encourage this, right, at every level, right, to make sure that when we're interviewing for board level, there are women, right, when we're interviewing for a teller in a branch, we have lots of women and we have lots of men applying for the jobs, right. So it's in its early stages, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, Siobhan, right. This is 5 years in. I was a founder member of the Women in Business Network, right, and the Focused Women's Network, and it's slow. It's exactly what was said earlier on. Right, it takes a wee while, but it's cultural, and we will get there.
That's helpful to know, thank you. Just finally, it's in a different point, convener. It was to Tanver. I just wanted to know, do you think there's a difference between how visible and invisible minorities are treated when they're going, so women going, or is it just the same for both? And do you think if it is a difference, do the employers recognise that difference?
Oh, definitely. I think there is a difference when, say, for instance, it's ethnic minority women going for a job and into the mainstream. This is an area I would like to see more women going into mainstream jobs, because if you're just going to be just stuck with the ethnic minority organisation, there's no progression route. It's a dead-end job for many. And because they're based within a small organisation, so there isn't, there's more demand on them. And if there was say, for instance, an invisible person from the whether it's a Polish community or somebody else going for a job, I think there will be a lot more chances of that person getting the job than a person from from the visible communities. I think that has always been the case. One of the things I would really like to also to see some sort of monitoring done by the universities as well, to see if there is any data. I don't know whether there is any data exists that how many ethnic minorities are going into which roles, which courses, undergraduate, postgraduate courses as well, and where do we see the gap, and how can organisations help to bridge that gap as well. And the other thing, I don't think we have touched on the apprenticeship. I mean, at the moment, the age is between 16 to 24-year-old. But there are people out there without a job who do need some sort of apprenticeship as well. If that age bar can be increased, I think that would give more people an opportunity to get into apprenticeships.
As there are no further questions from committee members to the witnesses, can I thank all our witnesses this morning for coming along and giving us your evidence. It's been a very informative and useful session and will help us a lot as we take our inquiry forward. And that concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will take place on Thursday, the 23rd of May, and will include ministerial evidence on women in work. Thank you.